Ryan Parker hadn't planned on stopping at the grocery store that evening, but his fridge was nearly empty, and he was in no mood for takeout again. He just wanted to grab a few things and head home. But as he stepped into the parking lot, a woman struggling with overloaded bags caught his attention. One of the bags slipped from her grasp, and a dozen apples scattered across the pavement. She let out a frustrated sigh, pushing a strand of dark hair from her face. Without thinking, Ryan jogged over. "Here, let me help." He crouched down, picking up the apples before they could roll under a parked car. The woman looked up, startled. Up close, he noticed how striking she was: deep brown eyes, flushed cheeks, and lips slightly parted in surprise. "Oh," she breathed. "Thank you." Ryan collected the last apple and placed it back in the bag. "You got a lot to carry. Let me help you to your car." She hesitated for a second before nodding. That would actually be great. He took two of her heavier bags, following her to a small blue sedan. As she unlocked the trunk, she glanced at him. "You didn't have to do this, you know," Ryan shrugged. "It's no problem." She gave him a small smile, and something about it made his chest tighten. "I'm Olivia, by the way." "Ryan." He set the bags inside the trunk, then took a step back. "You sure you got the rest?" She nodded. "Yeah." "Thanks again, Ryan." He expected that to be the end of it, just a small act of kindness before they both went their separate ways. But as he turned to leave, Olivia sighed, shaking her head. "Of course, today of all days, my car won't start." Ryan glanced over his shoulder. "Dead battery." No clue. She tried the ignition again, but the engine wouldn't turn over. "I don't suppose you know anything about cars." "I know enough." He moved to the driver's side. "Pop the hood," she did, stepping out to stand beside him as he peered inside. He checked the battery connections, then turned to her. "I can jump it for you if you have cables." Olivia sighed. "I don't. I've been meaning to get some, but I have some in my truck." "Hang on." Ryan retrieved the jumper cables, attaching them to her battery. As he worked, Olivia leaned against the car, watching him. "You're really going above and beyond for a stranger," he smirked. "Maybe I just have a habit of rescuing people in grocery store parking lots." She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Well, I appreciate it." A few minutes later, her engine roared to life. Olivia let out a relieved breath. "You are officially my hero." Ryan chuckled. "It was nothing." She hesitated, biting her lip. "Can I buy you a coffee or something, as a thank you?" He hadn't been expecting that, and yet something about Olivia intrigued him. He found himself saying, "Yeah, I'd like that." Her smile widened. "Great. There's a little cafe down the street, if you're free now." Ryan glanced at his grocery bag, then back at her. "The milk could wait. Let's go." As they drove separately to the cafe, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. Something about Olivia felt different. And as he pulled into the parking lot, he had the strangest thought. He never expected that helping a woman with her groceries would lead to anything. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something more. The cafe was warm and inviting, the scent of freshly brewed coffee thick in the air. Ryan followed Olivia inside, surprised by how comfortable this already felt. He hadn't planned on meeting anyone tonight, let alone ending up in a cozy cafe with a woman who had an easy smile and eyes that made it hard to look away. They found a small table near the window, and Olivia sighed as she settled into her chair. "I can't believe my car almost stranded me in a grocery store parking lot." "That would have been an embarrassing way to end the day," Ryan smirked. "At least you had a hero nearby." She rolled her eyes, but there was amusement in them. "Right, a very modest hero, too." The conversation flowed easily as they ordered their drinks. She got a caramel latte, and he stuck with black coffee. The barista handed them their cups, and they returned to their table. "So what do you do, Ryan?" Olivia asked, stirring her latte. "I'm a carpenter," he said. "Mostly custom furniture and renovations." Her eyebrows lifted in interest. "That sounds really cool." "Do you enjoy it?" He nodded. "Yeah, I do. There's something satisfying about building something with your own hands, making something that lasts." Olivia smiled. "I get that. I'm a teacher." First grade. Ryan took a sip of his coffee. That explains the patience. You didn't even curse when your car wouldn't start, she laughed. Trust me, I wanted to. But I spend all day telling kids to use their words, so I try to follow my own advice. He found himself grinning. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who made you want to keep the conversation going just to hear her laugh again. So, what were you doing out grocery shopping so late? He asked. She sighed dramatically. Avoiding it all day until I had no choice. My fridge was basically empty. Same, see, we have so much in common already, she teased. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. He liked the way she joked with him, like they'd known each other longer than an hour. As the conversation continued, he found himself forgetting about everything else the long day, the errands he still had to run. He was caught up in the way Olivia talked, the way she gestured with her hands when she was excited about something. The cafe was quiet enough that the sound of her voice, warm and animated, filled the space between them. At some point, Olivia glanced at her watch and let out a small sigh. I should probably get going before I find another way to cause trouble. You mean before your car decides to betray you again? Exactly. They stood, grabbing their cups. As they stepped outside, the night air was crisp, a light breeze rustling through the trees lining the street. Olivia turned to him, hesitating for a beat. This was fun. Unexpected, but fun. Ryan nodded. Yeah, it was. For a second, there was a pause, something unspoken hanging between them. Then, Olivia reached into her bag, pulling out a pen. She grabbed a napkin and scribbled something down before handing it to him. My number, she said, a little shyly, in case you ever feel like rescuing someone again. Ryan took it, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. I'll keep that in mind. She smiled, then turned toward her car. He watched as she got in, and this time the engine started without issue. As she drove off, Ryan looked down at the napkin in his hand, a slow smile spreading across his face. He hadn't expected any of this. But for the first time in a long while, he found himself looking forward to what came next. Ryan hadn't planned on texting Olivia so soon, but the napkin with her number sat on his kitchen counter, taunting him. He didn't want to overthink it, but something about her had stuck with him. The way she laughed, the way she seemed so at ease with him, it was rare. And he wasn't the kind of guy to ignore something like that. So, after staring at his phone for longer than he'd ever admit, he sent a simple message. Ryan, hope your car is still behaving, or do I need to show up with another rescue plan? A few minutes passed before his phone buzzed. Olivia, so far so good, but I'll keep you on speed dial just in case. He smirked, shaking his head. Ryan, good to know my hero reputation is intact. Olivia, unquestioned, but if you really want to prove yourself, you could meet me for coffee again, this time on purpose. Ryan didn't even hesitate. Ryan, name the time and place. The next evening, they met at the same cafe. Olivia was already sitting at a table by the window when Ryan walked in, her fingers wrapped around a cup of something warm. She looked up as he approached, her smile widening. You're early, she teased. So are you, she shrugged. Maybe I was looking forward to this. Ryan sat across from her, studying her face. There was something about Olivia that made him feel at ease, like they were picking up a conversation they'd left unfinished. They talked about everything and nothing: her students, his latest woodworking project, their mutual hatred for grocery shopping. The conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter slipping between them like they'd known each other for years instead of days. At one point, Olivia leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. You know, I don't usually do this. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Do what? Meet up with strangers I barely know. Technically, I'm not a stranger. I'm your grocery store hero, she laughed, shaking her head. Right, how could I forget? There was something unspoken in her gaze, something curious and cautious all at once. Ryan wasn't the kind of guy who rushed things, but with Olivia, he felt this pull, like waiting would be a mistake. So what made you say yes? He asked. She tilted her head, considering. Honestly, I have no idea, but I'm glad I did. Ryan nodded, feeling the same way. The evening stretched on, time slipping away unnoticed. It wasn't until the barista started wiping down tables that Olivia glanced at the clock and sighed. Wow, we've been here for hours. Ryan glanced around, realizing the cafe had mostly emptied. He hadn't even noticed. Guess that means we should call it a night, he said, though he wasn't ready to say goodbye just yet. Olivia stood, grabbing her coat. As they stepped outside, the air was cool, the city buzzing softly around them. She turned to him, hesitating. I had a really good time, Ryan. Me too. For a second, it felt like something might happen, like she might lean in, or he might close the space between them. But then Olivia took a small step back, tucking her hair behind her ear. I should go, she murmured. Ryan nodded, though a part of him wanted to keep her there. Text me when you get home, she smiled. Only if you promise not to critique my parking, he smirked. No promises, she laughed, shaking her head as she walked toward her car. Ryan watched her go, something settling deep in his chest. This thing between them, whatever it wasn't just a random encounter anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he didn't want to let something slip away. Ryan wasn't the type to get caught up in what-ifs, but there was something about the way Olivia lingered in his mind that made him rethink everything he thought he knew about himself. He found himself checking his phone more often than usual, catching himself anticipating her messages, replaying their conversations in his head. And the best part, she was just as eager. Their texts turned into late-night calls that stretched past midnight, filled with laughter, teasing, and quiet moments where neither of them spoke, just listened to each other breathe. It was easy, too easy. So when Olivia invited him over for dinner at her place, Ryan didn't hesitate. Her apartment was small but warm, the kind of space that felt lived in. Cozy blankets draped over the couch, a few framed photos scattered around. The scent of something rich and savory filled the air, and she greeted him at the door with flour on her cheek and a sheepish smile. Okay, full disclosure, she said, stepping aside to let him in. I might have overestimated my cooking skills, Ryan smirked. Should I be worried? She laughed. No, it's edible, just… Maybe not great. He followed her into the kitchen, where a pot simmered on the stove. She lifted the lid, stirring the contents with a wooden spoon. Ryan leaned against the counter, watching her. You didn't have to cook, you know. I wanted to, she said simply, glancing at him. I figured it was time I returned the favor for all your heroics. Something about the way she said it, so effortlessly, made his chest tighten. She wasn't just saying it to be polite, she meant it. Then I guess I better eat every bite, he teased, and she grinned. Dinner was a little chaotic. She dropped a spoon, nearly burned the bread, and at one point they both had to wave towels at the smoke alarm. But it was fun. And when they finally sat down to eat, Ryan realized he hadn't laughed this much in a long time. Olivia sighed, pushing her plate away. Okay verdict, not terrible but also not my best work, Ryan smirked. I've had worse. She narrowed her eyes. That sounds dangerously close to an insult. Never, he said, holding up his hands in surrender. She shook her head, but her smile didn't fade. After dinner, they moved to the couch, a half-empty bottle of wine between them. Olivia curled her legs beneath her, watching him with a curious tilt of her head. You don't talk about yourself much, she said after a moment. Ryan raised an eyebrow. I talk plenty. No, she said, smiling softly. You listen plenty, but you don't really talk about you. He hesitated. He wasn't used to people noticing that about him. Olivia didn't push, but the way she looked at him made him want to say something, to let her in just a little. I guess I just never saw the point, he admitted finally. Most people aren't really listening. They just wait for their turn to talk. She studied him, her expression unreadable. I'm listening. And for some reason, that made all the difference. Ryan exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. I don't know, there's not much to tell. I work, I build things. I keep my head down. Olivia frowned slightly. That sounds lonely, he shrugged. It's just how it is. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You don't have to do that with me, you know." Something in his chest shifted. Before he could respond, she reached for his hand, fingers brushing his. It was a small touch, barely anything, but it sent heat curling through him. Ryan turned his hand over, letting their fingers tangle together. Neither of them spoke, but in that moment, words weren't necessary. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. And Ryan knew, without a doubt, that whatever this was between them, it wasn't something he could walk away from. Not now, not ever. Ryan wasn't sure when it happened, when Olivia became the thing he looked forward to most in his day, when her laughter started lingering in his thoughts, even after they said goodnight. All he knew was that she was under his skin in a way no one else ever had been, and it terrified him. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, late-night conversations, spontaneous coffee dates, stolen moments that felt too big for what they were. He wasn't the kind of guy who rushed into things, but with Olivia, nothing felt rushed. It felt inevitable, like he had been waiting for her without even realizing it. Tonight, they were supposed to meet for dinner at a small family-owned restaurant she had been raving about. He arrived first, leaning against his truck as he waited, anticipation settling low in his stomach. When Olivia finally pulled up, she climbed out of her car and his breath caught. She wasn't dressed up, not really, just a simple sundress, her hair pinned back loosely. But it was the way she smiled when she saw him, like she was just as happy to be here as he was, that made his chest tighten. "Hey," she said, walking up to him. "Been waiting long." "Not long," he murmured, taking in the way her eyes sparkled under the streetlights. She slipped her arm through his, tugging him toward the restaurant door. "Come on, I promise this place will change your life." Ryan wasn't sure about the food, but Olivia, she had already changed his. Inside, the restaurant was warm and inviting, the scent of herbs and spices filling the air. They found a small table in the back, and as they settled in, Olivia propped her chin on her hand, studying him. "You're quiet tonight." Ryan tilted his head. "I didn't realize I was usually loud." She rolled her eyes. "You know what I mean." He hesitated. He didn't want to ruin the night with the thoughts swirling in his head, but Olivia had a way of seeing through him. So he exhaled and said, "I keep thinking about how fast this is happening." Her expression didn't change, but he saw the way she stilled, the way her fingers curled slightly against the table. "Is that a bad thing?" she asked carefully. "No," he said quickly. "That's what's messing with me." "It's not a bad thing." For a moment, she didn't say anything, just watched him like she was trying to figure out what he wasn't saying. Then quietly she asked, "Are you waiting for it to go wrong?" Ryan's throat tightened. Maybe he was. He had never been the guy who let himself believe in things that were too good to be true. And this, her, felt like something he wasn't sure he deserved. Olivia sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Ryan, I know we haven't known each other long. But I also know that I haven't felt like this in a long time, maybe ever." His chest ached at her words. She swallowed, her voice softer now. "I don't know where this is going. But I do know that I don't want to spend my time being afraid of it." Ryan stared at her, everything in him pulling toward her like gravity. He had spent so much of his life keeping his head down, avoiding things that felt like they could break him. But Olivia, she wasn't breaking him. She was making him feel whole in ways he hadn't even realized he was missing. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be afraid of that. Ryan reached across the table, his fingers brushing over hers. "I don't want to be afraid of it either." Olivia let out a breath, and when she smiled, it was softer now, but no less brilliant. Dinner passed in a blur of easy conversation and quiet moments where they didn't need to say anything at all. And when Ryan walked her to her car, he hesitated for only a second before reaching for her hand again. She looked up at him, waiting. Ryan wasn't a man of grand, sweeping gestures. He wasn't the kind of guy who made promises he couldn't keep, but Olivia made him want to be, so he cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "I want this," he admitted, his voice rough. "You and me. Whatever this is turning into." Her breath hitched, and then she was closing the space between them, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as she pulled him down into a kiss that stole every thought from his head. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was just them. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, falling didn't have to be scary. Not if Olivia was the one catching him. Ryan had never been the kind of man who believed in fate, but as he stood on Olivia's doorstep, watching her fumble with her keys while grinning up at him like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her, he started to wonder if maybe some things were just meant to be. The kiss outside the restaurant had changed everything. It had shifted something between them, deepened it in a way that words never could. Now, as she finally got the door open and turned to face him, her lips parted slightly like she was waiting for him to say something, Ryan realized he didn't want to leave. And from the way Olivia lingered, neither did she. "Come inside," she murmured, her fingers brushing his wrist, barely a touch but enough to send heat curling through him. He stepped inside without hesitation. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside. Olivia walked ahead of him, kicking off her shoes, then turned, watching him like she was memorizing every detail of this moment. Ryan didn't give her a chance to overthink it. He reached for her, pulling her against him, and she melted into him like she had been waiting for this for him. Their mouths met, slow and deep, no rush, no urgency, just the quiet realization that they had found something neither of them had been looking for. Her hands slid up his chest, curled into the fabric of his shirt, and he knew, without a doubt, that this was it for him. When they finally broke apart, Olivia was breathing hard, her forehead resting against his. "Well," she whispered, her voice teasing but soft, "this escalated quickly." Ryan chuckled, his hands settling at her waist. "You complaining?" "Not even a little." She pulled him toward the couch, curling up beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. Ryan kept his arm around her, his fingers idly tracing patterns on her skin. It felt easy, natural. "I feel like I should be freaking out," she admitted after a moment. Ryan glanced at her. "Why?" she sighed, shifting to face him. "Because this is fast, and I don't do fast, I don't do impulsive," he smirked. "Liar. You met me in a grocery store parking lot and invited me for coffee an hour later." She laughed, rolling her eyes. "Okay, fine, maybe I'm a little impulsive, but this," she gestured between them. "This is different," Ryan nodded, understanding. "Yeah, it is." She looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "But I don't want to slow down." Something in his chest eased, and he tightened his grip around her, pulling her closer. "Good. Because I don't think I could if I tried." Olivia smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I think I'm falling for you, Ryan." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, not because they scared him, but because he felt the exact same way. He held her gaze, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "I'm already there," her breath caught. And then she was kissing him again, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing closer like she couldn't get enough, like she didn't want to. And Ryan knew, without a doubt, that she was it for him. They spent the rest of the night tangled together, talking in soft whispers, stealing kisses, learning each other in a way that had nothing to do with words. By the time morning came, Ryan had stopped wondering if this was too fast, if it was too much. Because it wasn't. It was exactly right. And as Olivia curled against him, her head resting on his chest, Ryan knew one thing for certain: he wasn't just falling in love with her. He already had.